What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. This week's video is going to be very different from other videos that we've looked at on the channel so far. This is something that affected me so deeply, so emotionally, that I just wanted to share it with you guys and look at some of the behaviors and facial expressions under a very different light. So normally on the channel, we look at situations where we're trying to see past the mask, to see what someone is really feeling, really thinking, and what body language and facial expressions can give away. This one is almost the polar opposite of that. This is so real, and we're gonna look at real expressions, why we feel the way we do in certain situations, and why we react physically the way that we do to certain emotions. So quite a few of you sent me a request to look at this video. And what got me interested was that a lot of your messages had a theme. A lot of you mentioned that you don't know why this impacted you emotionally the way that it did. And even the judges are impacted in a way that you don't quite understand. Why is there this deep response to this? So I wanted to take a look at it. And this is an 18-year-old young man auditioning on American Idol, and it hit me like a train. I don't typically get super emotional at these auditions because, well, for one reason, I've done so many of these reality competition shows. I have friends who have done these competition shows. I've been part of this world. So a big part of me is constantly aware of what's going on and how this is being presented. But regardless of all that, this one made me so emotional. And here's the best part. There are reasons that this is emotionally as impactful as it is. There are things that we're seeing in the expressions of the judges. There are things in his communication skills, in the way he communicates certain things that amplify the impact this has. And in this video, we're gonna look at all those things. We're gonna look at how to be emotionally impactful when you communicate. We're gonna look at the real face of emotion. Another element that I'm really excited to bring to this is my experience on TV shows like this. So I've been on 6 national televised competition shows, but I've consulted on countless more, and one of my closest friends has actually won America's Got Talent, and there's a lot going on here from a production standpoint that make this also really interesting. So we're gonna talk about that as well. Now, before we jump into this amazing story, this beautiful performance, I wanna tell you this. My initial plan was gonna be to play you the whole audition, so that you could feel that emotion, you could feel that impact. But I also knew that depending on the copyright owner, that may or may not be possible, because sometimes when you use copyright footage, YouTube blocks the revenue. I didn't care about the revenue. This is so much deeper than that. This is so emotional for me. I just wanted to share this with you guys. So I was like, it doesn't matter. The money doesn't matter. But sometimes YouTube also blocks your ability to have this on your channel altogether. And that's the message that came up when I tried to upload this. It said not only is the monetization blocked, but nobody will be able to see this. So unfortunately, I do have to cut this up into shorter clips in order to be able to use the footage. So there are 2 ways you could go about watching this video. The first way is just keep watching. I have enough clips here for you to get the gist of it, to feel the emotion, absolutely, but you won't feel the full impact. So when you're done this video, you can head down to the description and watch the audition as is from beginning to end to see all of this come together. The second way is to pause this video right now, head down to the description, click the audition link, and just watch the whole audition. It's 7 minutes of your time, and just feel that full impact. Now, I will give you a quick warning. If you're emotionally very moved by things, and if you've lost a family member recently, this might be super impactful. So just be warned. But if you do want to do that, go watch the audition, go ahead and do that, and then come back. Okay, so let's dive right in. A lot of really exciting things to talk about. So this is the audition of a young man by the name of Iam Tongi from Kahuku, Hawaii. And let's just look at right in the beginning, after he walks in, as he's talking just a little bit about his life.
Why on earth would you leave Hawaii?
Price out of paradise. You know, that's what it is. You know, price out of paradise, and
I get it.
you gotta move to a cheaper state.
We're fixing to get you priced back in Hawaii.
Yeah.
You're gonna go back
Any
in?
chance, move back.
I think he should buy
Is
an
your
island.
family there, or where's your family?
Most of my mom's siblings, she has 12 siblings. I have family in Hawaii, but my mom, we all live in Seattle.
Right away, there's something about the guy that is instantly likable. And in a moment, we'll talk about what that is and why he's so freaking good at it. But first, let's kind of establish a quick baseline for his behavior. So if we look at the gauge from like super stressed to super comfortable, I would say somewhere in the middle. There's a certain comfort with him in the way that he's talking. We're not seeing extreme nervousness like we do see on these shows quite often. There's a bit of swaying back and forth. His hands are in his pocket. Often it's just the one, sometimes it's both. When they make a joke about, pricing him back to paradise, the hand comes up for like an excitement gesture, then goes right back in. And hands in pocket isn't necessarily super stressed. Often it's just comfortable or even comforting. I do want you to notice that after he says priced out of paradise and had to move to a cheaper state, the left eyebrow, just the left one, flashes really quickly. I can't even do it that quick. I don't think I could just move one eyebrow without moving the other, but it quickly flashes like this. That's part of his baseline. It happens a lot. We're seeing it here for the first time, and just note that it's happening in a normal conversation. There's one more thing I want you to notice with the body language here, and it's the moment he makes the joke priced out of paradise. And as he's laughing, he quickly looks to his right. So he looks to his right and he comes back and he's laughing through that. So in this audition room on camera, we're seeing the 3 judges and we are seeing the person who's auditioning. But there's also production crew in that room. There's at least a cameraman operating the camera that's on the right. And typically there are a couple of producers back there who are just overseeing everything. They might make a cut, ask someone to take something again or a question again to make sure they got the shot. And I believe in this case that there are a couple of producers on the right. We're gonna have a few more confirmations of this later. I also want to quickly address the possibility that he has friends or family member to his right in that room. And although it's possible, it's severely unlikely because at the end of his audition, we see him walk out the doors and see his uncle and announce to him that he made it. And, big celebration. But we notice that his uncle is behind closed doors. And those doors look exactly like the doors that are behind and to the left of Iam. So that's likely where the family members and friends wait. The act comes in, auditions, then leaves through those same doors. Production is going to want the initial reaction of friends and family members. So it's unlikely that they want them in that room with the act. I don't think that's what's happening. So let's talk about what makes him so instantly likable. And the first thing you'll notice is that his conversation style is very casual. He's not starstruck, he's not kissing up to the judges, but on the other hand, he's not disrespectful or entitled either. He has this sweet spot in the middle where he's talking to them like they're people. So he's talking about, priced out of paradise. So he's talking to these celebrities who are very financially successful about money problems, but not in a way where he's looking for pity or trying to tell this sad story. Just kind of, life is life. So he's just telling them this the way you would tell this to someone at the grocery line. He's just making casual conversation. And when you do that, in that exact place he found between casual and respectful, you melt away that mask of pretension. And that's what's happening here. He's speaking to the human in them. He's becoming instantly relatable. So another thing that I touched on, but I really want to drive home, is that he doesn't seek pity. So he's talking about financial issues here. He's going to go on to talk about the loss of his father, but he's not using these elements to pull pity out of people. So there are some people out there who take the hardships of life and put them on display as a tool to get pity. And let me tell you a secret about these individuals. People run away from them. I know it's a harsh statement because a lot of us are empathetic and we like to help people and we get joy out of helping people. That's true. But the people who constantly use their hardships to draw pity out of people, it's like they siphon energy from people. And we've all met someone like that. Now, I'm not talking about if you had a rough day or something negative happened and you share that with your family or your friends. Nothing wrong with that. That's actually very healthy to go looking for help and advice from your support system. I'm talking about people who are constantly playing victim or only focusing on the hardships of life because they have a basic need for pity. It makes them feel more valuable when people feel sorry for them. So in Iam's case, when he was asked about family, I could promise you the first person he thought about was his father. But he didn't talk about his father. He talked about his mom and her siblings and all that stuff. He didn't go immediately to the subject that would get him that pity. The judges had to ask him specifically about his father, and we're going to talk about why they asked him that in a moment, but they had to bring it up, and then he's going to talk about the father. So he's not purposely going for those topics that are going to get him that pity that he knows he'll get. And nothing demonstrates his strength and his lack of pity seeking more than this next clip. So they're about to ask him about his father. I want you to pay attention and look at how many things he does, whether it's with his face or with his hands, to try to hide his sadness, to not go towards sadness. Take a look.
And your dad?
My dad passed away like a couple of months ago.
Sorry, buddy.
So
all right.
who got you into music?
My dad, he taught me.
He's
when I was
the
very
reason
young.
for all this, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's his name?
Rodney.
Rodney.
Rodney, yeah.
I could tell he meant a lot to you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, buddy.
I got it, man.
I counted 12. 12 different things that he does to stop that sadness from coming out because he's not trying to put it on display. Now, before we talk about that, let's talk about this. The fact that Katy Perry straight up asked him, what about your dad? It almost feels like she knew to talk about that. And she probably did. It's possible that this is just, conversationally it came up while they're asking, but I would bet money that it's in her notes. A lot of people look at a lot of these reality shows and say, oh, it's all scripted, it's not real, none of it's real, and that's really, really not true. Look, I've been on a ton of these shows. Again, I have friends who have won these shows, and I can tell you a lot of what you see is real. As for the judges, they have notes. So the producers will either give them a sheet of paper with the names of, who's auditioning, maybe one little quick thing about them, and then a couple of topics to bring up. I've seen that sheet before. It can also just be something a producer tells them before the audition, but it's not a whole story. Like, for example, they may not know that he lost his father, but there's a note that says, talk about family, talk about his father. But let's talk about displaying versus concealing negative emotions. So as human beings, we have a basic reflex to conceal negative emotions as soon as we feel them, especially publicly. And this is automatic. So you might notice someone giving a speech and sadness hits them and they might go, excuse me, and they might turn away to take a second. Very commonly, you see them look down as they try to recollect their thoughts. When we're surprised or shocked and our mouth opens, what do? Our hands come up and cover it. The reason for this is really simple. Historically, it was never to our advantage to display our weaknesses, because if an enemy were to perceive you as weak, it would compromise your odds of survival. So we have a natural reflex to not want people to know when we're experiencing negative emotions because it makes us vulnerable. So when we see someone who displays sadness, subconsciously it throws us off. So think about a kid who's just trying to get attention and they're crying and but they're extending it, trying to get the attention of their parents. The parents inherently know that this is a more fake cry for attention than if they hurt themselves or sad and they go inwards and cry like this rather than like this. Another fantastic example of this is some of you might remember my analysis videos of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard on trial. And very often Amber Heard would have this sad face and she would display it to the jury. And in the comments, there were so many people who said, I can't stand how she keeps putting the sad face on and looking at the jury. Whether you studied body language, whether you don't know anything about body language, this is something that inherently bothered a lot of people because even subconsciously we know it doesn't make sense to have this sadness, like look how sad I am. It's not normal. So the opposite of that is also true. As much as it irritates us when someone's trying to get that sadness because it feels off, when we see someone trying to hold sadness back, especially when we relate to why this would make them sad, it makes us connect with this person. We feel for them more. So let's look at Iam in this video and the things that he did to try to hold back his sadness when the subject of his father came up. So here's what I have. First and foremost, there's a serious drop in his tone. So at first he's talking, he's up here, he's animated. When the subject of his dad comes up, his voice goes down to here. And this is something that happens with sadness when our voice cracks to go lower like this. And we're definitely hearing that happen. That's one. Two, we're seeing a really quick lip retraction that turns into a lip lick. So his lips come inwards like this, and then immediately tongue comes out and he licks his lips. Now, when he walked into the audition room, there was a moment where his tongue stuck out and then went back in. So that could be related to stress, excitement, something along those lines. But in this case, it's different. It's a full-on licking of the lips. And this is often associated with stress. When we're stressed, our mouth dries out and that can correct it. It's also related to grooming. And grooming is anything we do to fix our appearance. And when we're feeling vulnerable or sad, we might fix our appearance to just kind of bring that confidence back up. So in this case, that lip licking could be either one, but lip retraction is very consistent with holding emotions back. Very often when someone's about to cry but they don't want to, one of the most common things you'll see is the lips come in like this. In fact, we're about to see Katy Perry do this a couple of times herself. Then we see the hand come up and rub the back of his head. And there's a lot of terms for this in the body language literature. Often it's called a pacifier because, you know, a pacifier soothes us. But very commonly it's called an adapter. And what a perfect word to describe what's happening in this case. He's adapting to the situation. So pacifiers, adapters, or manipulators is anything where we manipulate a part of our body to self-soothe, to calm ourselves down. In fact, they're also called self-soothing gestures. There's a lot of research on this, and very often there's different terms used to talk about the same thing, but it's a gesture that helps calm us down. So that sadness is hitting him and he's adapting. Then we have something that is very specific to this gentleman, and it's gonna happen a lot in this, even after the audition, and I can't even simulate it. Again, it's very specific to him, and it's where his bottom lip curls up on one side. It's almost like a lip biting / lifting thing. It's really hard to simulate, but again, it's very closely related to that lip retraction. It's just holding your emotions back, like this kind of thing, but it's going up like this. Almost immediately with that lip gesture, we see that eyebrow again from earlier shoot up. I'm not gonna give that one that much attention because it just happens with him, whether he's sad or not, but it happens a lot with this lip curl as well. Several times we see both those things at the same time. Then we get another big licking of the lips. This time the tongue comes all the way out. And again, stress or grooming. And by the way, we sometimes lick our lips for other reasons as well. You know, like they're chapped or they're dry or something like that. But in this case, it's significant because so many other things are happening at the same time. And all of a sudden, he's licking his lips a lot in a way that he wasn't in his baseline. This is why we baseline. There are some people who just naturally do this all the time. If he was one of those people, I would say not so important. But because it's happening with all these other behaviors and it wasn't happening a lot before, well, it's significant. Next, we see this pouting gesture like this. And that is, again, something we see very often when someone's trying to hold back emotion or hold back words. You might see someone disagree and go like this, like, well, I'm not so sure. And it's kind of, we're trying to hold something in. It's kind of like a lip compression, but a little higher and a little more like sticking out. But it's still tightness in the lips and is consistent with holding something in. Then we get 2 more lip retractions in quick succession. Then we get the classic, looking down. And this is, when emotion hits us, again, remember, we try to hide it. So looking down is very common, especially when we're trying to collect ourselves. Then we have a full-on wiping of the face. And this is self-explanatory. It's like trying to just wipe it off, just get past it. And finally, we get, again, that bottom lip coming up with the eyebrow at the same time. And that's just in that clip. They keep talking to him, and a lot of these things happen some more while they're talking to him about this topic. So there are at least 12 things that he's doing, and then again, some more as he goes on, to hold that emotion back. Because he's not here for pity. He doesn't want to use his sad story to get ahead. And I think that's part of the reason that this was so deeply emotional to us. Because here's this guy who's gone through something really difficult, and he's on a TV show where he knows if he leans into that, he could probably get a lot of pity from people, but he's not doing that. He's holding it in, he's trying to get past it, he's trying to play his song. The last thing I want to talk about before we move on is something that a lot of people think when they watch these shows, and it's, what are the judges supposed to say, right? Like, this guy's coming in with this story, and whether he's good or he's bad at music, what are they supposed to say? Do they even stand a chance? Can they even say no? So is it fair for these sob stories to be on these shows? And I know exactly what the answer to that question is. And it's got more to do with the casting process. So I have a lot of friends who work high up in casting on competition shows like this. And what they've told me is that the standard that they have for individuals with a sob story is much higher in terms of talent than anyone else. Because anyone else could come in, they could be good, they could be bad, it's fine, it'll work out, it won't work out. But people with a sob story put the judges in a difficult position, because if they have this really hard story and their talent isn't quite on par, then the judges are stuck having to say either no to someone who has already gone through a lot, or they have to say yes to someone who's not quite that talented because of a sob story. And the audience might feel that and go, oh, well, come on, this guy's just, getting ahead based on his story, not his talent. The other thing is, often when someone has a sad story, the audience feels bad for them and wants them to succeed. So if their talent isn't on par and the judges say, sorry, we're not going to let you through, we see the judges as villains. And the last thing production wants is for their judges to be perceived as villains. So it's a very slippery slope. And although there was a time where casting purposely looked for sob stories because it pulls at the heartstrings, in time, a lot of them shifted to where if they're going to put someone on the show with a sob story, the talent has to be exceptional. Okay, now we're going to hear him sing. And his song is Monsters by James Blunt, which is a song that James Blunt wrote when his father's health was critical. I guess maybe the way I cut it up won't be as impactful. But again, if you're sensitive to this kind of thing, or you've lost a family member, just hit mute. And then when it comes back to me, you wouldn't have missed anything because we're talking about behaviors anyways. And there's quite a few going on here.
Oh, before they turn off all the lights, I won't read you your wrongs or your rights. Time is gone. Oh, I'll tell you goodnight, close the door. I'll tell you I love you once more. Time is gone, so here it is.
Whew. Okay, so we often hear people say, always make a good first impression. On reality competition shows like this, there are two first impressions. One is when you come in and you talk to the judges, that first interaction, they're forming an impression. But the second is when you actually start performing. This is where they're going to get a sense, especially in those first notes, as a performer. They're going to get their first impression of you. So the one person in this that I want you to pay attention to is Katy Perry. The moment Iam starts singing, she turns to Luke Bryan and we see a very distinct look. It's this. So we see the mouth of sadness, but the cheeks are somehow raised a little to where it's not sad, it's kind of this hopeful / almost happy looking sad. I know that's a weird thing to say, but if you look at it really closely, the cheeks are kind of raising a little and there's this kind of smile under the mouth of sadness. That face, that expression is unmistakable. And I know that a lot of you instantly know what it is, and it loosely translates to, oh my God, I love him, or aw. And there's a very interesting reason that I believe Katy Perry is doing it in that moment. And especially that she's turning to Luke Bryan with it. So it's not just an expression. You wouldn't see this expression of someone just doing it alone. This is something that's social. We show it to someone else. So we see something really cute or something that's really gets us emotional, and we kind of go, oh, and we look at someone like to give them that reaction, to be like, oh, I can't, that type of thing. The reason it's happening right there with Katy Perry is the following. When this kid came in and told his story, she can't yet feel for him. She could be sad for his story, but she can't completely give into that emotion yet, because she doesn't know yet if he's a good singer or not. In this moment, it took him just a few notes for her to know instantly that he's an incredible singer, and in this moment, she can allow herself to fully feel that emotion. So in this moment, she's telling Luke Bryan almost, oh my God, I'm so relieved that he's actually good. And now I'm so sad, and that is coming out in this moment because she was holding it in just to see if the talent matches the story. On the way back from this communication with Luke Bryan, notice how Katy Perry has a stop. It's not, she doesn't go from him back to Iam. She goes from Luke and there's a stop. She looks somewhere else and then to Iam. This is the second thing that's going to confirm for me that there's someone there. To the judge's left, to Iam's right. Maybe it's just a quick look at the production, like a look of acknowledgement, or maybe someone there is already getting pretty emotional as well and that's getting her attention. But the important thing for me there is that that stopover for me confirms that there's some people over there to the judge's left. Let's talk about Iam's performance. There isn't much right there in the body language, except for one really important thing, and it's the fact that right there, and he's going to continue to do this, Iam sings with his eyes closed. And it's not like he sings with his eyes open and then something happens where he's going to hit a high note and he closes his eyes. His eyes are closed a lot throughout the performance, to the point where some coaches on the show suggested that he opens his eyes more often. And, you know, musically, these people have a lot more experience than me and might know how to connect with an audience. But from a body language perspective, I was deeply impacted by the fact that he had his eyes closed almost throughout his entire performance. It's not a lack of confidence. It's not stress. It goes back to what I said earlier. A lot of people on these shows, while they're singing, they're scanning the judges. They want to know what the judges think, how they're doing. It's almost like he doesn't care. He's not really looking for their approval enormously. I mean, he's thankful when he gets it, but this is for him. This is almost a therapy for himself. When we close our eyes, it's because we're internalizing thought. We're trying to hold on to a thought or trying to stop a thought from coming in. So when we get bad news, we might close our eyes. But this is researched, and even blind children who are born blind, when they focus on something, when they internalize thought, they close their eyes. And this is really valuable because it's not like they observe this behavior, and it's not like they need to block out distractions. This is innately human. We close our eyes when we're trying to hold on to a thought. I think that's what this is with Iam. I think he's singing to his dad, and I think he's singing for himself. And I think he closes his eyes because he imagines his father there with him, and this is a personal experience for him. This is such a different vibe from other people who perform on television. That big external energy where they hit those high vibratos to show off their voice. That's not what we're getting here. We're getting a very smooth voice, very smooth performance, but this almost private experience that we have the privilege of witnessing. Okay, now it's about to get really deep with the lyrics, with the facial expressions, and take a close look at Lionel Richie's facial expression in this next bar. Just really look at the details of what's happening with him.
I'm not your son, you're not my father. We're just two grown men saying goodbye. No need to forgive, no need to forget. I know your mistakes and you know mine. While you're sleeping, I try to make you proud. So daddy, won't you just close your eyes? Don't be afraid, it's my turn to chase the monsters away.
Okay, first of all, James Blunt is unreasonable. There are lyrics in this song that should be illegal for how brilliantly written they are and how impactful they are. I think he's one of the best lyricists of our generation. I mean, just look at the first line there. I'm not your son, you're not my father, we're just two grown men saying goodbye. Anyways, so obviously I'm not the only one who thinks that those lyrics are very impactful, because the moment that line is delivered, we see a lot from Lionel Richie. Now, what's really interesting about this is that Lionel Richie obviously has quite a bit of cosmetic surgery on his face. And there's a lot of things that should move certain ways, but that don't. And Botox and plastic surgery is a nightmare for behavioral analysts because we can't quite see the full depth of the motions that we're looking for. But in this case, he is speaking volumes with his gaze alone. So the moment that sensational line is delivered, first we hear a oh, and that's a very distinct sound. That is when something hits us and it's tough. It's that of like, oh man, it's literally like that punch in the emotions. And at the same moment, we get that eye block. And remember earlier how I said when you close those eyes, either you're trying to hold on to something or keep something out. In this case, he's trying to stop that emotion from impacting him. It's exactly what I said earlier. When something happens that's a negative emotion, the first thing we want to do is hide it. So he's closing his eyes, we get it hits, eye block, the head goes downwards, so he's neck guarding, right? Because when we're feeling vulnerable, we want to protect our vital areas, and the neck is one of them. So the head is going down, and immediately we're getting a flutter. Now, eye flutter is something that happens when we're trying to process thought or emotion. So something happens that we're trying to deal with, trying to process how we're going to deal with this, the flutters happen. So whenever you see a flutter, just tell yourself immediately, processing. But fluttering isn't uncommon to see when we're about to cry. And it's still processing. We're still processing that emotion and trying to like stop it, but it happens often when we're about to cry and we don't want to. After the flutter, we see once again a very distinct gesture where his shoulders come up like this as he turns away. And with his hand, he comes up like this to block the mouth. So this is called turtling. Very often, again, when we feel vulnerable, we want to block things. We want to block our vulnerabilities. And so limbs might come in front of us. You know, we might do things like this, or self-hug. But also very commonly, the shoulders come up like this and the head gets tucked down a little bit. It's exactly like a turtle protecting itself. We're coming inwards to be protective. So we're seeing those shoulders come up. We're seeing the hand come up again in an attempt to just hold something back. But he turns and he looks away. And there's something very distinct in that moment that distinguishes this from other gestures of simply looking away. So looking away from something can have quite a few meanings. Often it's quite dismissive. So if you're talking to someone and they just kind of look away, it's like they're bored, they're above this, they don't really care, especially if they're kind of going from left to right like this, like I'm not listening to this. Sometimes in deep thought, someone says something and in deep thought you look away because you're focusing on it and you might look up like this, but often we see some sort of scrunching with this or some kind of sign that there's deep thought, they're reflecting on something. There might be an element of that to this, like reflection, but there's something here that makes this distinct. The thing that distinguishes this moment is the squint. So he looks away like this, and there's this bit of a squint like this. And this, once again, super consistent, is often when something deeply impacts us, and we kind of need to look away from it for a sec to help ourselves deal with it. So after processing, he's still just trying to deal with this emotion. So we're turtling, you know, we're blocking the mouth, we're trying to hold this in, and there's this kind of squint off in the distance. And it's kind of like, don't cry, just keep yourself together. And that's what we're seeing in that moment. It's almost unmistakable. And in that attempt to kind of, you know, not give into this emotion, he fails because he just goes, oh, that exasperation, oh, as he looks down, and then we get this forehead scratch, and then he looks right back up at Iam. So it's like, I'm trying to not feel this, but oh, I just can't. I'm just gonna surrender to it. So now he looks up and he surrenders to it. And Lionel is doing this crazy dance between surrendering to the emotion and trying to not really feel it. But he keeps attempting and failing, attempting and failing. In fact, immediately after this whole thing that we saw, in literally the next line, we see him make these noises again, like, no, I can't handle this. It's almost like he's vocalizing that he's having a hard time with this as his head just gestures like this and he goes back and forth. At all costs, he's just trying to not fall deeper into this pit of emotion. And all these expressions, once again, explain why people watched this and said, what is it about this that's so deeply emotional? And it's simply the fact that nobody's trying to oversell their sadness here. Oh my God, I'm so emotional, look at me. Almost everyone involved is making attempts to block the sadness and hold it together, including the performer. And that's why we're feeling it. Because we're sad and we go, oh my God, they're trying to keep it together. This isn't this big display that's trying to get our emotion. In fact, it's trying to conceal it, but I'm just a mess.
Yes, and breathe, a last word. Can feel my hand on your own. 'Cause I'm not your son, you're not my father. We're just two grown men saying goodbye.
Okay, so there's something in that clip, a possibility in that clip that if that's even a little bit what's going on, that's like emotional destruction for me. We'll get back to that in a sec because I want you to notice right in the beginning, Lionel Richie, his tongue sticks out all the way. This isn't a lip lick. This isn't a tongue jut. His tongue comes all the way out. And this is literally just gasping desperately for air. It's literally panting. which is something we don't often see. But when you're getting choked up for a while, it's very difficult to stay emotional for a long period of time. We usually experience emotions for a couple of seconds, but this performance just keeps hitting him with that emotion. And when that happens, often there's this desperate attempt to get oxygen. So we might take a deep breath or we might start hyperventilating. And in this case, just sticking his tongue out, it's this sort of attempt to just get some air going on. Right at the end there, we see Luke Bryan kind of casually and slowly look over to the judges, and then he turns back to Iam and then quickly shoots back. So we see it's really fast. He kind of like, whoa, shoots back. And we see exactly why. The camera cuts to Lionel, who's still falling apart. And it's crazy how Luke is in that moment seeing something concerning with Lionel Richie that he's probably rarely seen, because it's like getting his attention to go right back. He's just checking in on his friend. Like he's like, I think Lionel's dying here of just emotional overdose. So it's just kind of getting him that double take. But there's something about Iam in that moment that is hauntingly beautiful that I want to talk about. And it's immediately after the lyric, "You can feel my hand on your own." So as he says that line, "You could feel my hand on your own," he turns to his right and immediately closes his eyes. And it's not just back to closing, it's a hard squint as he turns back. And we see this kind of like, oh, damn, no gesture. So it's almost this negative second in his expression. Like there's something that he's having a hard time with. So I have two theories as to what's happening here. And one of these theories is really hard. The first theory is that we've already established at this point that there are some producers, cameramen, crew, whatever, to his right. So it's possible that in that moment as he's singing, he turns, happens to open his eyes, and he sees someone emotional over his song. Maybe someone's crying, maybe someone's, and he just kind of immediately turns away from that because it's hard to see that. You know, it's hard to see someone falling apart while you're singing. There's a good chance that that's what it is. But I have a second theory, and this one requires just a little bit of backstory. So his dad was his initial inspiration when it comes to music. He taught him a lot of the music he knows. And in fact, they used to sing together a lot. They have a bunch of clips on his YouTube channel, and his dad is a fantastic singer, and he harmonizes with him. And when for years you sing with someone or you perform music with someone and you get used to their presence within your music, it's very hard to not hear that. In fact, after this performance, he makes a comment that whenever he sings, he still hears his dad. He feels like his dad is there with him, and he hears the harmonies that his dad would be performing in that song.
People thought I cried, you know, because I miss him, but it's because I hear him singing. I can hear his harmony. I can hear like how he would harmonize with me in that song.
Also, Iam is indigenous Hawaiian, and I don't want to generalize or assume things, but very often Polynesians are very spiritual. And there are things that he said in this audition, in other auditions, that would lead me to believe that he is extremely spiritual. He talks about his dad often like his dad is still there, like in the present. There's a very real possibility that when he performs, he very much feels and hears the presence of his dad. This also explains why he often has his eyes closed. He's in his little bubble with his dad. This is where he is with his dad. And again, we get to witness this, which is why I think this is a very powerful performance. So there's a part of me that's thinking it's possible in that moment that, especially because he's saying the line, "You could feel my hand on your own." So it connects them physically in that moment. So there's a possibility for me that as he's saying that, he's envisioning his father next to him, singing with him, performing with him, like he's still there. And he's opening his eyes to visualize that for a moment, and then it's just hitting him so hard, and he's going right back into that emotion. Because something in that moment is hitting him really hard. There's a piece of me going, it could be he sees someone, because we know there's people there, but there's another part of me going, it's harder than that. So if I were to find out that that's what it is, my second theory, that he's in that moment envisioning and thinking of his dad, I wouldn't be able to survive that. There's no way.
While you're sleeping, I try to make you proud. So daddy, won't you just close your eyes? Don't be afraid. It's my turn to chase the monsters away. Oh, sorry.
That's all right, man. That's all right, man.
Okay, back to Lionel Richie on this one, because there's something really distinct there that I think is really interesting. So Again, he's still emoting. You know, we could see this kind of turtled posture still a little bit sticking around. Now he's vibrating, and I don't know if this is his body or just his head or because he's tapping his foot really quick. As a pacifier or an adapter, we often fidget to adapt. So he might be doing that, and that's just, we see the vibration of that, I'm not sure. But at some point, we see him look down. And I bet to a lot of people, you felt a deep emotion in that moment, which is bizarre because he's just looking down, right? Why would, you know, someone looking down be that impactful? And I'll tell you why. So it's not the fact that his eyes just go down. It's the fact that his eyes go down slowly. And this is something we see much more rarely. So very often when we change our gaze or the direction we're looking at, it's a quick shoot, like it just quickly goes to where it's gonna go. In this case, notice how slowly his eyes just go from here to there as he whispers something to himself. You are seeing here a slow crumble. He's crumbling. And we're seeing that emotion. And although he's not saying a word, although his face doesn't move much, all it takes is those eyes slowly just going like this. Notice how that's different than just bam, just looking down, because you're seeing that descent.
I mean, what a fantastic song to pick.
Thank you.
I'm telling you.
I feel like you could have written this song.
Thank you.
I mean, you sang it, you delivered it, and you're making these grown men cry. You hit a nerve.
I want to talk about one last thing here with Katy Perry, and this is one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to body language. In fact, in comments, I very often get, sometimes it's people who are new to body language or don't know much about body language, but even sometimes people who really know their stuff and who have very insightful comments will misinterpret this gesture. And the gesture in question is the head shaking no, like this. So very often in my comments, I'll read someone who's saying, oh, the person shook their head like this, they don't believe what they're saying, or they're being deceptive. So first of all, I'll keep saying this in my videos until I'm blue in the face. There isn't a single gesture that you could see on someone that means that they're being deceptive for sure. That gesture doesn't exist. But least of all, the head going like this. Because in certain circumstances, yes, there's something there that you can look into. For example, if you ask me, did you go to the movies last night? Or were you at the movies last night? And I say yes, but I do this as I say yes. I go, yeah, I was at the movies. That's incongruent. I'm giving you a positive statement, something that requires an affirmation, and there's an incongruent gesture in that moment. That's suspicious. Within a cluster, that's important. But there are many, many reasons we might shake our head no like this. In fact, sometimes with an affirmation, we might shake our head no like this. And I'll give you a terrific example. A couple of months ago, I was at a restaurant with my cousin, and he asked the waitress, can I replace something with something else? I don't remember what it was, but can I replace this thing on the menu by this? And the waitress said, absolutely, as she did this. So why does this happen? So the head shaking like this can have a lot of meanings, but very often in conversation, it falls into one of four categories, and they all start with DIS, dis. So we have disbelief, when there's just something we can't believe. We have disagreement, where we don't quite agree with something. We have disappointment, where we're disappointed in someone. And we have disapproval, when we really don't approve of something. Like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't approve of this. I'm not in. So in the case of the waitress at the restaurant, it was disagreement, but not to the question that was asked, but to the subtle thought in her head. Basically, it was a nonverbal way of saying, there's no problem with that. Of course we could do that. Don't even worry about it. There's no problem. So she's disagreeing with any reason to not substitute what he's asking for. So think about that. In some situations, we emphasize a yes with a no problem. So the no is a yes. So back to Katy Perry. She's saying, what a fantastic song to pick. And she's doing this while looking at him. And this is very likely disbelief. Like, it's unbelievable how you just got the perfect song. It can also be, like the waitress at the restaurant, a bit of disagreement. Like, there is no song that would have been better than this. Almost like denying anything other than this opinion. Like, that is the right song and nothing else would have been as good. So very often, this no gesture does happen when in our head we're thinking like, there's no other option, there's no problem, there's nothing better. And you got to be very careful before you assume that this means that they're disagreeing with their statement. It can mean that. We can often do this when we disagree with what we're saying, but it's such a leap to assume that that's the only thing it could mean. So always take context into consideration. For example, if we go back to my example before of were you at the movies last night, now consider if you were to ask me, did you witness the car accident yesterday? And I go, yeah, man, it was crazy. So this doesn't mean I didn't witness it. It's that disbelief. I'm having a hard time believing what I saw. So always take context into consideration. So important. So there it was. Hope you enjoyed that. Again, this was something that was deeply emotional for me that I wanted to share with you guys, because my community on YouTube, you guys are like family. I talk to you every day. I'm very active in the comments, and I learn so much from you guys. It's unbelievable how much value I get from the insight often in the comments, and I can't wait to read your comments on this one as well. Once again, I'm sorry I had to chop it up. It's just YouTube wouldn't allow me to even show it if I didn't, but I do encourage you to go check out the full audition and get the full impact if you can handle it. It is quite deep emotionally. But besides that, let me know what you thought in the comments, and I will see you on the next one.